Welcome. I am so glad to have each and every one of you with us today. And I'm also very excited to have Dr. Darren Morton with us. And I am really interested in this topic of nature's medicine. So I'm glad that you chose it as a topic to talk to us about today. I know you and I were talking beforehand, and I shared some experiences where if I'm out in nature a lot, I feel really good. And then when I'm not in it as much as I used to be, I don't quite feel the exact same health benefits. So I think it'll be fun to go through what the presentation you have created for us today says. And before I turn things over to Dr. Morton, I just want to take a quick moment to introduce you to who he is. Dr. Darren Morton is an internationally recognized lifestyle medicine expert who is currently the director of the Lifestyle Medicine and Health Research Center at Avondale University. Darren has developed well-being programs, such as the LIFT Project, that have engaged tens of thousands of participants from over 50 countries. He is also the author of 4 books that have collectively sold over 100,000 copies and has approximately 80 publications in scientific and medical journals. And we are so excited to have you here with us today, Dr. Morton. Take it away.
Thank you, team. Hey, really nice to be with you from the other side of the planet. I'm looking at in the chat room there, and it looks like we've got people from Canada and mostly the US, but I'm tucked down below. But it's a beautiful day here, and we're actually one day ahead of you guys. So the good news is a good day is coming your way, hopefully. But hey, you're really nice to be with you. As Michelle introduced, my name's Darren, and I'm the director of the Lifestyle Medicine and Health Research Center at Avondale University. And I love this topic, and I hope that you're going to enjoy it as well. Nature as medicine. Now, before we start, we've thrown around this term of lifestyle medicine a little bit, and that's very much the space that I'm immersed in. But I'm interested to know what you know about lifestyle medicine, and I'll preface this by saying that lifestyle medicine is a rapidly growing discipline within healthcare all around the world. A very exciting space, and what it realises is that many of the conditions that we suffer and die from today are actually lifestyle related, have lifestyle origins. And so lifestyle medicine is all about treating the cause. So it's sort of looking at what are these factors that we can modify that can help to produce better health outcomes. And what we is quite well established within the lifestyle medicine world is that, sorry, I just need to figure out how to advance my slide here. I did have it. Oh, here we go. I've got it. That there are these, what we refer to as the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. And I'm wondering if you might know what they are. And if you do, pop them in the chat function now. So does anyone know what are the established, pretty much sort of globally accepted 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine? These are lifestyle factors that affect our health outcomes. So I'm having a look at the chat function here. Has anyone got any ideas? And there's some hints there in that little image. I gave a little bit of a swipe of the image. So yes, we have. Diane says plant forward. So certainly nutrition is a big piece of the lifestyle medicine landscape, and very much they advocate a whole food plant-based diet. So yes, that's in there. Yeah, if you look in that image there, you can see there's a little hand weight. And yes, so exercise or physical activity is a really important part of it. The way I did the swipe, I should have left a little bit more of the image, because the bowl that the food is contained in there is a little love heart shape, and that relates to social connection. And I noticed that I think it's some of you have got that. We've got avoidance of risky substances in there as well. Water, yes, you guys are doing exceptionally great. Social connectedness. So here is pretty much what is accepted, and the American College of Lifestyle Medicine was the first one to sort of really bear down on these 6 pillars, but now most other societies in lifestyle medicine around the world have accepted it as well. And so nutrition, exercise, tobacco and alcohol avoidance, stress management, sleep. I didn't know if I saw sleep in there. Oh yes, we had sleep there. In the chat room, and then healthy relationships as well. We know there's a very strong connection between these lifestyle behaviours and health outcomes. And we know that they're not just preventive, but they're also curative. So when people apply these, we can actually see, not just, the prevention, but also the management, sometimes even treatment of these chronic conditions, which is very exciting. However, there is a move towards the introduction, or there's a push coming for the introduction of one more pillar of lifestyle medicine. And one of the leads on this is Melissa Sunderman, who is, a physician in the United States. And she actually led this article that was published in the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine just a little while back. And she calls it Nature as Medicine, the seventh unofficial, as yet, pillar of lifestyle medicine. And Melissa actually runs a Nature as Medicine special interest group within the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And what I think is that she's got a really good case. She's got a really good point to argue that within that lifestyle medicine world, nature should be should feature. And what I want to do in this presentation is look at some of the evidence for that. So I'm going to look at two things. First of all, what's the evidence that nature is good for us? And secondly, and this is where it gets, I find fascinating. And what I'll say too, this is new work that's being done, new research. So some of it, we don't quite know if it's right yet, but I find it really intriguing. And I hope as we go through, there'll be some insights that you'll go, wow, well, that's interesting. And then we sort of just watch that space as it evolves and develops. But I think you'll find this quite intriguing, some of the work that's being done. So we're going to look at what's the evidence that the nature is good for us, and what's the mechanism by which nature might be having these beneficial effects for us. So let's start by asking the question, well, what is the evidence? What is so great about the great outdoors? Well, we've actually known for a long time that there are definitely therapeutic benefits of being exposed to nature. You can see this is a study, I won't even do the sums on how many years ago this is now, but that's pushing about 40 years, is it? 40 years ago, we actually we knew that even things like when in a hospital environment where people have access to a window view of nature, that they would tend to take less pain-killing medication. They would tend to have shorter hospital stays. And we've seen this consistent. So we've known for a long time there's something in this. There's something about natural environments that are good for us. We actually see the same thing with regards to domestic violence. If you have more nature views in a building, people are they tend to be less aggressive. And so there's something calming, there's something therapeutic about these natural environments. More recently, and particularly in the last decade, I would say, there's been an increased attention in this and some of the benefits. And within Japan, they have this practice that they call, I think it's Shinrin-yoku, which is, I'm not sure if that's how it's pronounced. At least I'm not sure if that's how it's pronounced with an Australian accent. But basically what this means is forest bathing. And what they do is go and immerse themselves in very rich natural environments, so very green space, forest environments. And what you see there, within about 2 hours of exposure to a very, rich natural environment like that, even things like natural killer T cells. So these are key aspects of our immune function. They start to dial up and elevate it. And after 2 hours, those improvements you'll still have. Obviously, as you go back into the real world, maybe that is the real world, into the artificial world, that you start to see, that reduce. But those improvements in natural killer T cells will persist for up to 7 days later. And in fact, one of the recommendations that's coming through quite clearly now is that if you can, a little bit of, and we'll talk about some ways to do this, but exposure to nature, the more you can do, the better, really. But if you can have quite a concerted sort of pocket of time each week where you try and really immerse yourself in a natural environment, there are benefits that extend for the whole throughout the week for doing that. What we definitely know, there's some of the physical health benefits, like less pain-killing medication, shorter hospital stays, improved immune function. But what we certainly know, and once again, a lot of evidence developing in this space, is that from a mental health perspective, there is something very, very good about nature. They talk about this as the word is biophilia. It's like we're natural environments naturally engage our senses. It seems to be very restorative. It doesn't tax our brains, as you'll see some studies in just a little while, in the same way that artificial environments do. This particular study was conducted in a country very close to mine. This is the country of New Zealand. And all the researchers did here is they looked at maps of the terrain, the urban terrain where people lived, and then they actually could identify how close people lived to blue and green, so to natural spaces. And what they found is that for every 1% increase in the proportion of sort of green space that was close to their home, there was a 4% reduction in depression and anxiety disorders. And so you think 1%, 4%, that doesn't sound like a great, big deal. But you think about this, that means if you could double your access to green space, you would see about a 400% reduction in the prevalence of anxiety and depression. So this is a very strong connection. And in the city of Auckland, where this study was conducted in New Zealand, that was the first to demonstrate that. But subsequently, other studies have found the same thing. And these are very large-scale studies. This was conducted in Wales. You can see 2.3 million adults involved. And once again, when they actually look to see how accessible and how much time people are spending in green spaces and the link to mental health conditions, what they found, there's this very strong connection. You can almost predict the further people are away from nature, the less happy they are in some regards. In fact, there's quite a famous quote from the Anne Frank, who actually made that very statement. She says, the closer you are to nature, the happier you will be. And so, from a mental health perspective, we certainly know there's very strong connections there. And it was interesting, Michelle said, she's found getting outside, and I certainly, this is the case, if I spend a lot of time indoors and then all of a sudden I can get out where the sun's shining and it's bright, you almost instantly can breathe again and you feel yourself come alive. So there's a lot of interest and a lot of research that's growing and showing the benefits of being in green spaces. However, I should point out here, and Wallace Nichols was the author of this book called Blue Mind, and I've actually heard, in fact, I mentioned Melissa Sunderman, who runs the Naturist Medicine Special Interest Group for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. She had Wallace Nichols on as a guest presenter, and I went along and listened to his presentation. And what he was arguing is that everyone's talking about green spaces, but don't forget about the blue spaces, because, as he points out, and he said he likes to he's got a little blue marble that it's like his business card. He actually hands out blue marbles to people to help them to remember that we actually live on a predominantly blue planet. And we're surrounded by, water, and there's something, and in fact, we are mostly water, we humans. And so he makes the case that there's something really good, and he cites a whole lot of evidence for the fact that there's something really good for us humans to be in, on, under, and around water. So it's not just green spaces, it's blue spaces as well. And so I have this little saying that I always like to share, which is blue and green should often be seen. And in fact, that's this topic that we're exploring is sort of lesson 3 in the LIFT project, which you guys all get free access to, and you'll hear more about that later on. So look, there's really good evidence to suggest that these nature-rich environments are great for us. So here's the question: why? What goes on? What's the mechanism? And this is where, as a researcher and as a scientist, I get excited, because I like to know why things work the way they do, and I hope that you do too. And so let's explore this. And now I do want to just make this caveat at this point that some of these studies and some of this science is very much emerging, and so we're only still trying to put the pieces together. So some of it, we might be in time, we might find, no, that's not actually the case. It might not be. But I think this is fun to experiment with anyway and explore. So what is the mechanism by which nature actually has its good effects for us? Well, certainly it's going to be the fact that when we're out, into natural environments, our senses are exposed to all that's on offer out there. And, we talk about our, 5 key senses, but from a physiological point of view, we probably have a whole lot more senses than that that go beyond just the big five of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. And these include things like we have sensors inside us that are picking up, for example, even on the temperature of our blood and the pH of our blood. And we have sensors on our skin that do a whole range of other picking up, how much access we have to UV light. There's a whole lot of more sensors that extend far beyond the big five that we often talk about. And some scientists say that we probably have around about 21 different types of sensors. And these sensors, we might not be consciously aware of them, but they're actually connecting and doing stuff for us that are vital to our health as well. But to focus in on the big sensors, what we definitely know is that when you go outside or when you're exposed to natural environments, your eyes are exposed to a world that your eyes like to be exposed to. There are some studies here that have shown that if you put people in like a functional MRI machine, where we can actually see how their brains light up, when they're doing different tasks and exposed to different things, is that if you just on a screen in front of them flash up either urban, like built city environments, sort of concrete jungles, pollution, as compared to these blue and green rich spaces, and you can see some examples of those images there. If you just flash these up in front of people, you can actually see different regions of people's brains that light up. When they are exposed to sort of built environments, sort of the city landscape kind of concrete jungly type thing, you actually see regions in their brain associated with sort of almost fight or flight. These are reactive type responses. Those regions of the brain light up. Whereas with the natural environment, just the image of these, just the sight of this, right, is enough to actually elicit sort of relaxation and regions of the brain get active that are associated with those more calming states. So there's definitely the sight of something can excite an emotional response. And natural environments seem to be a site that our brains really like to see. That said, where there is some really interesting work being done, and I'd say this has been established for some time now, so this is probably, we're not going too fringe just yet, but certainly is on the benefits of exposure to natural light. Natural light has some really great properties to it. And there's a whole branch of science here that they talk about as photobiomodulation. And what we know is that you can use light, right, and particularly light from outside, to actually produce some really positive health outcomes. And there are two features to light that researchers are getting very interested in. One is the brightness of light they're exposed to, and the second is the type of light in terms of the colour of light. And so I want us to spend a little bit of time diving into those and exploring just a little bit about those. Before I do, let's talk about brightness first. And hey, I came across this the other day. My son actually showed this to me, this study, and I was laughing. I couldn't stop laughing because this speaks volumes about us humans. All right. So here you go. I'm going to show you the image. Sorry about it's a little bit blurred, but this here shows on that particular period of time from April 3 to April 10, 2024, this is how the volume of Google searches for the term eyes hurt. So people had punched in eyes hurt somewhere. And have a look at that and you think, oh, what on earth does that mean? So there you go. You can see that there's this band, this sort of diagonal band that goes across the country on the eastern side there. There seems to be a lot of people searching for eyes hurt, whereas on the other side, up in the far west, high west, not really anything going on. So what could explain this? Well, check this out. This was the path on that particular period of the solar eclipse, right? And so once again, marry these two together. Can you see what's going on here? All right, so we are going to be talking about the brightness of light, but I just want to stress from the outset, this is not talking about staring at the sun, which is clearly what's happened here. Despite all these public health announcements like, hey people, we're going to be having a solar eclipse that will be occurring at this particular period of time, but whatever you do, don't stare at the sun, right? And so what happens, there's Betty outside, Harold, come in here, check out, get a look at this. And he's like, I don't think we're meant to be looking at this. And it's like, yeah, but I can't look away. And next thing, we have all these people searching for remedies to eyes hurting. So anyway, that probably says a whole lot about us humans. But so takeaway, don't stare at the sun. But what we do know is that in outdoor spaces, there seems that the intensity, the brightness of light that we're immersed in is actually a lot brighter than indoor spaces, and it's really good for our brain. In fact, we know that your eyes, your optic nerve, goes to your emotional brain. And sitting on top of your optic nerve is this cluster of cells has a big name, it's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. But what this does is it's always aware of how much light we're being exposed to. And now what we have known for a long time, and for you fine folk who live in high latitudes, you will be aware of this as well, is that we've known about seasonal affective disorder, right, which is SAD for short. And this is where in high latitudes, during low lighting periods, during the winter months, when you don't receive a lot of brightness of light, we know that there's a tendency for depression to be very high, suicidal ideation. And so we know that low lighting, not experiencing enough lighting, doesn't seem to be good for our emotional brain, doesn't seem to be good for our emotional state. And what we're starting to get our head around more is, well, how much light do we actually need for us to be okay? And once again, this number might change. So this is sort of new science, new area. But what it seems is that we need probably around about 3,000 to 5,000 what we call lux hours, right? So what this is lux is just a measure of the brightness of light, the intensity of light. And then the hours part is, well, how long are you exposed to that for? Right? So what the estimate is, and once again, this is an estimate, we haven't bedded this number down yet, but probably around 3,000 to 5,000 lux hours each day is what you need. So where do you get that from? Well, let's have a look at this. Here is how much lux you experience under these different conditions. So let's take let's start with candlelight. That's not very bright, friends. Around about 10 to 50 lux. So to do the sums, let's say it was 10, we'll go on the low scale. So this is a little candle. And so if it was only 10 lux and you were right near that for 24 hours, you didn't sleep that entire day, and you sat there with this little 10 lux candlelight going on, what you would be obtaining is 10 lux times 24 hours, so 240 lux. You can see that's nowhere near the number that you're aiming for, which we think is about 3,000 to 5,000 lux hours in the course of the day. But do you know what? Even if you look at your living room, right? Living rooms, surprisingly, they're not that brightly lit. In fact, you might have around about 50 to 150 lux in terms of the brightness of light in your living room. So let's take the average of that. Let's say 100 lux. Can you see that even if you did not sleep for that entire day, you were up for 24 hours and you're exposed to 100 lux, the total tally for the day would be about 2,400 lux hours, which is not meeting that, and that's if you didn't sleep at all, okay? So you can see, oh, wait a sec, maybe I need to be a little bit more intentional about getting into brightly lit spaces. Even quite a brightly lit space, like an office environment, we know often will be around about 300 to 500. So you're going to be needing a minimum of like 10 hours or more in that kind of environment. And then it gets brighter and brighter, but look at where the all-star is. In direct sun, when the sun's shining on a bright sunny day, you step outside, you are going to be immersed in around 30,000 to 100,000 lux. So you can see under that scenario, you don't need to be out there for long before all of a sudden you're ticking that sort of 3,000 to 5,000 lux hours for the day, right? Literally within, maybe 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes, that would be enough to satisfy that. As a side note, I'll just point out this. So many people today sit there staring at a screen, and look how many lux screens are in. It's in the order of probably about 100-ish. So, I'm really concerned about young people in particular who are into gaming and, spend hours in their room, with windows closed, staring at a low, bright light emitting device like a screen. It's a real problem. And so I think, that we're going to hear more about this, the importance and the value of actually exposing ourselves to more brightness of light. And in fact, you can actually, and I have no shares in any of these products, by the way, but we actually now know that you can actually use even what they call bright light therapy. So you can actually buy devices that emit around about 10,000 lux, and people will have them to the side. Morning time seems to be the best. Sometimes they have a blue tinge to the light, and we'll talk about why that is in just a moment. And people will sit there for about half an hour or so, or 20 minutes, while they're reading in the morning or doing something, and they just have this bright emitting light off to the side. So you think about the numbers here. If you had 10,000 lux that was beaming and you sat there for, say, half an hour, that's actually 5,000 lux hours in that one sitting. So, you know what? This might be something of interest to you. What we do know, and there are more studies starting to demonstrate this, is that this bright light therapy, this bright light treatment, can actually be, has been shown in some studies to be even as effective as antidepressant medications for helping people with depressive disorders. So the brightness of light, it matters. It matters. And where will you find the best brightness? Well, it's outdoors, outdoor spaces. I will say this though, this is a really interesting, as I said, I love quirky little studies that I come across, and I found this one interesting. So this is published in JAMA, which is a very high-ranking, reputable journal. And what they've actually found is that bright light is great during the day, right? Because it makes us feel awake and alert, but not at night time. And in fact, there is, it's a really good idea to try and get your sleeping environment as dark as possible. And this particular study, what it actually found, it was a large study, had a number of people involved, and you can see published in JAMA, Internal Medicine. So this is very reputable. What they found is that when, and the study was done in a female cohort amongst women, but they found that having light exposure at night, which seems so bizarre, doesn't it? Like you've got your eyes closed most of the time, hopefully, whilst you're sleeping. But having night light exposure was associated with increased weight gain. In fact, it was around about, for people who slept with quite a lot of light in their environment, they on average carried about an extra 2 pounds of body weight. So and the name for this is artificial light at night. So abbreviated ALAN, ALAN. So I'm just saying, thanks, Alan. Thanks so much, Alan, for your contribution to weight gain. So anyway, bit of a fun fact. I thought that might be something you might be intrigued to know about. So one thing that we do know, another mechanism, so there seems to be our emotional brain needs certain brightness to be well and to help us to feel well. But what we also know is that light, particularly natural light, is very much involved in synchronizing our sleep-wake cycles, our biorhythms or circadian rhythms, as they're sometimes referred to. And there's this process that we call an entrainment. And what happens is that your brain has to almost reset each day. It's trying to figure out, when should I be sprightly and awake, and when is it time to wind down and become sleepy and rest. And those and we have all of our body, like even our temperature and our release of hormones, they all fluctuate over the course of the day according to these biorhythms. Exposure to light, particularly in the morning, is one of the best ways to help synchronize those sleep-wake cycles. It's almost like being exposed to morning light, and this makes sense because this has been happening for thousands of years. When we wake up and we see the sun in the morning, it's like our brain goes, morning time. All right, let's get back onto day pattern, and then and then as the sun sets, let's get back into night pattern now, and so we sleep well. So what we actually know is that light seems to be very important for that. And what I will say is that we're discovering more and more that getting your biorhythms in sync and getting those circadian cycles working nicely for you are actually very, very important for producing good health outcomes as well. So this may be another way that light, bright light, particularly in the morning, helps to produce good health outcomes. I will say this too, you can see that some of the other factors there listed in that little box that help set and reset our body clocks are things like physical activity and when you're active. So being active in the morning is another way to sort of wake up, rise and shine. Meals, so when you eat your meals, actually, and having certain sort of established eating patterns, meal times, that helps train our body clocks as well. And then obviously there's social factors and cues that come into play there as well. So first thing, just big picture, so we don't get lost in where we're talking about. We're talking about the idea that that light seems to be really good, and it being exposed to bright light, which is what we find outside, is actually really good for us in many ways that we're still discovering. The other interesting thing is there's a lot of research going on. I find this fascinating. Once again, very relatively new research, but what we're discovering is that we know natural light has the different colours in it. So white light is actually made up of a spectrum of different colours, and those different spectrums of light, those different colours within the visual sort of spectral realm that we can pick up on, they seem to have different qualities and different properties. So I'll give you, don't get freaked out by this. If you hated science at school, I'm not going to do anything too technical, but what I will say is that we know that there's a whole range of different sort of wavelengths of radiation. At one end, we've got these really slow waves, which are radio waves, and at the other end, you've got these really rapid high energy waves, which are gamma rays and X-rays. And there's this very narrow band of these sort of radiation waves that we can that our retinas can pick up on, and we detect as colours. And it's referred to as the visible light spectrum. And on the lower end, so the slower wavelength end, lower energy end, is red, which is the red light. And at the higher end, which is the wavelengths is shorter, but it's more rapid and more energetic, is the blue/violet light range. And what we're discovering is that even within that visible light range, we have that they seem to be producing different health outcomes, and they have different properties. I don't know if I want to go into too much. I don't want to overwhelm with too much stuff. But maybe I'll say this. What we do know is that red light, the red light end of the frequency, seems to be quite penetrating into our body. In fact, studies suggest that red light can go in around about 1/4 of an inch or so. So it actually gets quite deep into our tissues. And there is good evidence now that it actually stimulates the little energy cells, little energy factories, if you like, within our cells of our body. These are called the mitochondria. And it's mitochondria that helps us process energy and create energy and do a whole host of other things. And so there's great interest at the moment in how perhaps using red light and being exposed to red light might be really good to help with, well, certainly healing in tissues and energy release. There's an interesting study and published in a reputable journal that even found, for example, that when people on their back, right, this is a very large sort of skin area, were shining, when they shined red light to that region, which they know penetrates, about 1/4 of an inch or so into the skin and through into the tissues. And then they were given glucose, like a sugar test, that their blood sugar levels didn't spike to the same extent when they were exposed to this. So interesting work that's being done. Once again, it's perhaps sort of new, so don't sort of get too excited about it just yet. But I think there's some really interesting work coming through showing that exposure to red light might be good for healing, for skin, for mitochondrial function, for even helping to improve our sugar levels. So really interesting work done there. At the other end of the spectrum, on the blue light, the violet range, what we do know is that kind of light is more typical of what we see in the middle of the day. This is, and in fact, it's a quick science lesson just for those who are interested. That the sun, when it shines, it's shining just clear light, but it has all of the different colours in it. When the sun comes up in the morning and when it goes down in the evening, the light has to pass through a lot more of the atmosphere. And the blue light, so that blue and violet light, that, because it has a shorter wavelength, it gets dispersed a lot more. And so what does get through is actually the red end, the red / yellow light. So that's why sunsets actually have that red-yellow tinge to it, and sunrises as well. In the middle of the day, when the rays don't have to come through as much atmosphere, the blue light doesn't get dispersed as much, and so what we see is blue. So that's why the sky looks blue. And so it makes sense that when we're exposed to blue lights, this actually tells our brain that it's daytime. In fact, it's the middle of the daytime. And so this actually, it reduces, for example, the production of our sleepy hormone, which is called melatonin. And so this is why we tend to feel more alert. It's interesting that blue light, diminishes throughout the course of the day. And at the end of the day, it's meant to, we're not meant to be exposed to blue light, so that our brain then knows now's not the time to be awake. So let's go to sleep. And so it produces more of your sleepy hormone melatonin and makes you go to sleep. A big problem, I should add, is that when people stare at screens emit blue light. And so if you do that at night time, you're effectively telling your brain that it's the middle of the day, and hence, it can contribute to insomnia. So interesting stuff. Still early science, but I think it's really quite intriguing, and certainly I love learning the studies about this. There is some even less, and I think there's good evidence for, at this point, for red light, particularly blue light. There is some other work being done at the moment looking at green light, looking at violet, indigo, orange, and I'd say that the science on that's a bit more fringe, so I won't go there and dwell on that too much. But I find this fascinating. I came across this quote from Florence Nightingale. What a visionary. But this is her comment. She said, "Second only to fresh air, because fresh air is important, I should be inclined to rank light in importance for the sick. Direct sunlight, not only daylight, is necessary for a speedy recovery." I think she was onto something, and I think the science is only just catching up in this regard. So the fact that she said the second only to fresh air, well, let's talk about fresh air for just a moment. So what we know is that obviously fresh air, and particularly oxygen, is really, really important to us and really important to our health and well-being. But here is an interesting observation. This is a picture I took after, not last year, the year before, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine conference in Dallas. In Colorado, Denver. I had some friends who joined me. They flew over at the end of the conference, and we spent a week driving back, about 10 days, driving back from Colorado to San Francisco. But we went to all the national parks and we did trail running through. It was fantastic. This was a picture I took in the Colorado Rockies. And this was one of the walk/hikes we did, climbing up high. And I always, every time I go to Colorado, it reminds me of this. You see, this here are the obesity maps in the United States. And what it shows within the different states of the United States, what the prevalence of obesity is. So red and dark colours is higher prevalence, and blue is the lowest prevalence. And look at this. This is 2005. This is 2006, 2007. Can you see that Colorado there just does amazingly well in terms of it has lower levels of obesity? And so the question that you could ask is, well, why is that? What is it about Colorado that might be, helpful in that regard? Well, maybe it's a bit more active. Maybe that's a good thing. But let's hold that thought for a moment, ask what is it about Colorado? And I'll introduce you to this little study. This study has found that there seems to be increasing levels of obesity or weight gain, at least, amongst animals, even wild animals. You think, wait a sec, even wild animals are gaining weight. What could be the cause of that? It's not like, they're able to rush off to the fast food stores or, they're just sitting around because they've got modern conveniences and they're on the internet all the time. What could it be? And so these particular researchers are arguing, could it be something about in the air? Could it be in the air? Because we're all breathing the same air. We certainly know this obesity epidemic has happened in humans. This is, once again, this is a novel theory, but it's just fun to think about and explore. And in fact, there is some interesting work being done is looking at the connection between altitude and obesity. Specifically, and Colorado is high altitude. You know, you've got quite a few some 14,000 foot mountains there. And even Denver is, I think, 5,000 feet or more. And so, what could this be about? Well, what we do know is that when people go up higher in altitude, the air spreads out and there is less carbon dioxide in the air, right? Because it's spread out. So when you take a lung full of air, even though the percentage of the gases are the same, you get less carbon dioxide in your system. And we know that changes your biochemistry and actually affects the appetite center in your brain. So I don't know if anyone's done any high climbing, but if you go higher elevations, often people lose their appetite. And in fact, to keep their caloric intake, they almost have to force feed themselves. So here's the thought. What about if when you go higher and you have less carbon dioxide, you tend to not want to eat? What would happen if the opposite happened? If all of a sudden you got more carbon dioxide into your system? And so this novel theory is that, hey, we know that over the past 40 years or so, we've seen very significant improvements in the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. So here's a little map of that. You can see, you know, for thousands of years, it's never really got above about 300 parts per million. And then just recently, and today I actually looked at the latest you can get on the internet and see, I think it's around about 426 parts per million now. We've seen like a 40% increase in the levels of carbon dioxide within our atmosphere. And these researchers, you know, have just thrown the idea out there. The fact that we're seeing this in animals as well, could it be something about the air that we're breathing? And once again, don't sort of go, Darren said, this is definitely the case. I'm just going, hey, you know, I find this really interesting. If you look at the map, look at the climb over the past sort of, you know, since 1960 in carbon dioxide levels within the atmosphere. And then there's the prevalence and the gain of obesity over that same duration. There's quite a similar pattern there, isn't there? I think it's something that's worth noting. What do we do about that? Because it's outside if the CO2 levels are going up. Well, here's the bigger problem, is that if you're inside all the time with the windows closed, your CO2 levels can be like 2 to 5 times even higher than outside. And so the takeaway message here is, one, hey, you know what? Green up your indoor spaces if you can't go outside, because that actually takes CO2 out of the atmosphere and puts oxygen back in. Open windows, so at least you're ventilating, you know, a lot of the CO2 that's accumulating in here. And so these are some, you know, really quite simple things that we can do, but pointing to the whole idea of outdoors, or at least try and create access to it or simulate it in your own environment anyway. So I hope that's not too fringe for you, but definitely what we know is that, you know, sights that you're exposed to in outdoor environments, the smells that you're exposed to in outdoor environments seem to be really good for us. I could talk about some other things, but this is one last one, and then I'm going to start to wrap this up. There's a lot of work being done on looking at how we humans have a whole lot of bacteria in us and on us. And in fact, the numbers are that within your gut, you probably have about 100 trillion bacteria, which is about 10 times more than the number of human cells you have in your body. And what we're discovering is, you know, that gut microbiota, that gut microbiome, very strong connection between the health and the happiness of that and the health and the happiness of the rest of your body. We live symbiotically with these bacteria. By the way, the bacteria, if you want to keep them happy and healthy, feed them fiber, which is obviously a key message of, you know, full plate living. So, but what we're knowing is perhaps maybe because out in nature, there's a whole lot of really helpful bacteria out there. Most bugs are actually our friends. It's only a few minority to the bad ones. And there might be so there's some arguments that maybe actually getting into, you know, like gardening, where we're actually immersed in these kind of these bacteria, might be really good for us. Might help reestablish and help us to create good sort of healthy bacteria on and in us, so that we can be healthier too. I'm going super fringe here, folks, but I'll just say it and then I'm going to wrap this up. there's also, do you know that we actually are quite electrical, right? You can actually put an EKG on people and look at the electrical impulses that are going on. Some people say, hey, you know what? Maybe just like any other electrical circuit, maybe we need to be earthed as well. And so there's a bit of a move towards the idea of kick your shoes off and go walking around, get outdoors, and something like gardening when your hands are in the soil. That might be some benefits. That there are a couple of really small, early studies that have actually shown that when people are earthed, they call it earthing. When people are earthed, there might be slightly better blood sugar control. They might actually respond better to immunisations. There's a whole heap of really, I'd say that's quite fringe in early days, but watch this space. So with all that information, right, and as I said, to me, this is just a bit of a fun play around, like, wow, there's a lot out there. It's early days, there's interesting stuff, but I find it really quite fascinating. But it keeps pointing back to the fact that there's something really good about blue and green that should often be seen. So what should we do about that? Well, number one, if you can, go and play outside. Maybe your mum used to tell you that as a kid, go and play outside. Well, you know what, there's huge value to that. And the bluer and the greener and the richer the space that you can get access to, the better. And if you can, a solid chunk each week, like a 2-hour chunk is ideal. In fact, even more than that, they found there's added benefits. If you can spend 4 hours or so in a blue and green space each week, you get benefits that will persist throughout the week for you. If for whatever reason, I know that some people live in parts of the world where it might not be safe to do that, or you might not have access to that. Well, if that's the case, green up your space. So I've got pot plants, and I actually had a friend who's a eco-psychologist. He was a PhD student of mine, and he used to say, I tell people to get 10 plants. And I said, why 10 or more? And he said, well, when you've got 10, you have to look after them. So you're actually forced more to engage with nature. But there are some other benefits, obviously, about having lots of green spaces around. Light up your space. So once again, if you're constricted from getting outdoors, getting close to brightly lit windows is actually good for us. It's good for our emotional brain. So light up your space as much as you can. Open windows. So let the fresh air come in. It's probably going to be, even if it's not, pristine out there, it's probably going to be better, unless you live in a very, polluted part of the world. It's probably going to be better than the high CO2 levels that are on the indoors. And then, and I say this with some reservation, but get earthed. I'm a water baby. My happy place is the water, and I go surfing. And when I'm in there's something about being in that space, and even walking down to the water with, you don't have shoes on and you're on the beach. I don't know. There's something about it. I think the science is emerging, but I think we'll hear more about it. Hey friends, if you're interested in this stuff, so I've had a bit of fun with this topic, but this is actually lesson 3 in the LIFT project, called Blue and Green Should Often Be Seen. And there are a whole lot of, we explore 9 other topics that relate to what we can do to enhance our mental and our physical health. And as Full Plate Living members, you got free access to that. So please make use of it. And I know that the team are going to share details on how to do that. And let your friends and family know about this too. They could become access also. I'm going to stop talking. I know I went longer than I was meant to. Sorry, Michelle.
No, I thought that was very fascinating. I am so excited that you shared about this part of lesson 3 from the LIFT project, but it went in a little bit more deeply. And so I think that makes it special for us as a workshop. So thank you. I know it inspired me to go and spend a lot more time when I'm working to do it from my deck when I can. So I believe Amy put a link in the chat for you. So you can click on that link and you can sign up for the LIFT project. Again, the LIFT project is free for you as a member of Full Plate Living. And we are so honored to be able to provide that for you. We're thankful to Ardmore Institute of Health, our foundation that funds that so that we can do it. And so thankful for you being here, Dr. Morton, today and sharing your knowledge with us.
You are very welcome. It's my pleasure. I'll just make mention of this quick too. If anyone's interested in learning more about these sorts of things, we have a podcast called the LIFT Podcast that's freely available. And then once a month on a Wednesday, well, it's Tuesday for you guys. I don't know how the time conversion thing works, but we actually run a meetup called the Lift Meetup, where anyone's welcome to come. I do a 10-minute presentation on some topic that I find interesting, and hopefully others do too. And then we just get to chat about it for a while. So anyway, anyone's more than welcome to join us for that if you wanted to. That's freely available to you.
Darren, the Lift podcast, do y'all mainly usually share the Spotify page?
It's on Spotify.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll share that one in the chat for everyone too, if you're interested.
Yeah.
Excellent. And can you share with us maybe the topics of each of the Lift Project lessons?
Yeah, so the first one's called Your Limbo is Listening, which will make no sense to you unless you check it out. But basically in that one, I looked at the limbic region of your brain, and we Aussies, we give nicknames to everything. So I call it the limbo. But we look at how language actually affects our emotional states. So quite some really interesting work done there. Topic 2 is called Motion Creates Emotion. So it's all about movement and why that's so good for us. Blue and green should often be seen, 3. 4 is Together Feels Better. So we look at relationships there and how we can strengthen them. And the science on how we affect each other. It's fascinating. 3 degrees of separation. Then feelings follow your focus. We look at some of the work on that's coming out of the psychology realm on how things like expressing gratitude, having a sense of hope, looking forward to things, how that can influence our brain and how we feel. Food Feed Your Mood is lesson 6. That's all the nutrition piece. And I talk, I mentioned briefly about the gut microbiome and how fibre is so good for it. So we really we explore that in more detail in that lesson. Rest to feel your best is all about sleep, lesson 7. Stress less, lesson 8. And then the last 2 topics take a deeper dive into what does it really take, not just to feel better, but to feel better about life. And so the topics that lesson 9 is called Giving is Living. And so it looks at how, one of the best things we can do, and the science is very clear on this, the best things we can do for our emotional well-being is to do something good for someone else's. And so we rise by lifting others. And then the last topic's called What Does It Take to Flourish? And we really explore what does it look like to live a well life, and a fulfilling one and a meaningful one. And I really love that word, meaning. So where does that come from? What does that look like? So yeah, I'm sure you'd love it. We get, we've had many people engage with it, and there's about a dozen publications showing that when people engage with it, then they get some really meaningful improvements in their mental health metrics. So if you know someone who is looking for a lift, get them to register and sign up.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So again, Amy has put the link in for you so you can go ahead and join the Lift project. I do have 2 questions for you, Darren, so I think we should go through those real quick.
Yeah.
The first one is gardening a great hobby? I feel like you sort of answered that, but why not?
I love it. Gardening is fantastic. I'm terrible at it, but but I do my best. And look, it's you're outdoors. And look, even if it's not outdoors, even having garden, in your windowsill.
I was going to say, even doing these little pots right here last weekend, I had to redo some of them. I was like, this is so much fun, and too adding green to my office. So
yeah, you're engaged in life. That's a good thing in its own right. But yeah, definitely fantastic. Go gardening.
Yeah.
Yes. So the other question, it sounds like somebody has a question about perhaps they've already started the Lift project, but it says they haven't been able to attend the lectures offered by the Lift project. Are all replays available? Is there a link that can provide? I wrote to Lift on September 14, but haven't replied yet. So these, I'm going to answer partially. These are not lectures that are provided as live workshops, right? So there's no replays in that sense. This is a course very similar to the Full Plate Living Core program. So go ahead and go to the link that Amy provided, sign up for that, and then go through your lessons one at a time. Once you do the first one, Darren, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you get reminder emails for your next lesson, correct?
Yeah, you get prompts towards that. That's
yes. Yeah.
But she may be referring to the live session since she already kind of signed up through us a little bit earlier. So my guess is the live ones that y'all do periodically.
Oh,
Right.
the meetup.
Mhm.
The meetup.
Yeah.
That's not part of the LIFT project. That's just something that we do, a bit of fun. So I'm not quite. Yeah.
So yeah, the replay, as far as the lessons are accessible whenever you're ready for them and ready to do them, so you don't really miss anything. It's just a matter of picking up where you left off. So
yeah.
Darren, do you have a place for people who do want to join the meetup where they might sign up for those?
Yeah, just go that link there on the bottom of that page. Just go to the website and connect, and then if you go, just sign up to our newsletter. It comes out once a month, but it has, hey, this is this month's LIFT meetup, and there's the link for it. So it's a simple process.
And it is, just keep in mind there is a big time difference probably.
There is,
yeah.
And certain times a year when we have daylight savings doing that, it's a bit harder. Even, we have some people from the other side of the planet, but sometimes it's like 9 p.m. for them. But I think we're about to have daylight savings coming, so it turns out to be a whole lot more reasonable time for you guys. So we'd love to have you there. Love to see you there. It's a nice little.
All right, last question. Darren, you spoke about the best time to eat. Do you have a recommendation or maybe a resource for people to go, or?
That's a massive topic. And I think there's some really interesting research coming out, but some of it's a little bit novel. And to be honest, I probably wouldn't want to comment too much because I'm not a nutrition expert like these guys that you see on the screen. So I'd probably deflect. I don't want to be dismissive. I'm sorry, but I reckon maybe I'd deflect to you guys a little bit on how you might respond to that question. But there is some interesting work that just came out. In fact, the Nutrition 2025 conference that was run just a couple of months ago in Florida, there was some work looking at some of us are, our biorhythms. Some of us are more larks and some of us are more owls. And maybe mapping your eating patterns to that, there might be some benefits associated with this. Early days, the research, but I probably might go beyond that.
Excellent. I think most of the research and data we have seen recommends front loading your calories, right? So trying to eat your biggest meals earlier on in the day and then less so as you get ready for sleep. And I know for some people that's different, especially if you're dealing with shift work. So I don't want to say at night, I want to say when you get ready for sleep. So having your smaller meals closer to your bedtime and your bigger meals first time in the morning. And I know when we're talking about circadian rhythms, light affects those, but so does food. And so eating your first meal when you wake up in the morning does help with that as well.
Yes.
So that is all that I have on that. I don't think I can't speak to anything more than that.
Yeah. I do have one other question popped in. I just commented back. People are asking about a recording. You will get an email. Since you register for this workshop, you will get an email with that recording immediately following. And then we will take it as well. And we'll put it up in your Full Plate Living membership in the workshop section. If you're not a member yet, you can join at fullplateliving.org. It's 100% free. We'll have it there. We also do add closed captioning to that as well in English and Spanish. So that will be accessible as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that reminder, Amy. And then if you would like to at this time share something that you really liked about this workshop, maybe something that really struck you as new or different, or something that you really resonate with, or something you're putting into practice. And thank you again, Dr. Morton, for being here. This has been very enlightening and exciting to add new things to our routines and get in more of that blue and green light that apparently we really like.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Great to connect with you guys.
Excellent.
You too.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.